In an ever-going effort to clean out my constantly growing backlog, I have finally gotten around to playing the Suda51 title, No More Heroes. Released back in 2008 for the Wii, it was an action-adventure game that's about as punk as it gets. I haven't played any of other Suda51's games before this, but you can immediately feel his tourism in this game. It's unapologetically its own thing. It doesn't care about expectations, and it does what it wants to do and says what it wants to say, and it doesn't care what anybody else thinks.
Bad answer.
It's game time!
The story is about up-and-coming assassin Travis Touchdown, and besides having possibly the greatest name of all time, he sets out on a mission to kill the top 10 ranked assassins. It's not for fame, it's just to simply be number one, to prove that he is the best.
I don't care about titles or power. I just want to be number one.
Then master the ways of the assassin.
Here's your ticket to paradise, old man.
With his trusty beam katana that he won on an online auction, only because he was the only bidder since everybody else thought it was a joke, I'm completely serious, that's how he gets it, he embarks on a bloodbath-filled adventure to reach the top with plenty of hijinks along the way. The game is broken into a 3-part cycle. Every ranked fight requires an entry fee, so you complete odd jobs and side missions to earn money to pay the required amount. Then you fight through a few areas of goons, and it ends with a boss fight. The cycle starts over, and you rinse and repeat until the end of the game. The best way I could describe No More Heroes is a large collection of simple minigames, with one being more in-depth than the others, that being the core combat. The combat is simple and straightforward. You can switch between high and low stances with Travis's beam katana, which roughly correlates to light and heavy attacks respectively. They're also used to bypass enemy defenses depending on which way they guard. A high guard is beaten by a low stance attack, and vice versa. You can also use stun attacks to break enemy guards altogether to open them up, or dizzy them, which leaves them vulnerable to a wrestling move, which does a nice chunk of damage, especially against bosses. All 3 of these attacks can be charged, those being high stance attacks, which give a strong single target slash, low stance attacks that give a weaker but wide range circular AoE, and stun attacks that break guards regardless of the enemy's stance and immediately dizzies them. You must be conservative with your use of charge attacks that use your beam katana though, because they come at the heavy cost of most of your energy and can quickly deplete the entire gauge, in which at that point you must find a battery to refill it or charge it manually, which leaves you vulnerable to enemy attacks. Travis also has the ability to death blow his enemies after an enemy has been killed with a regular beam katana attack. He can finish them off with a stylish finisher that can also damage other enemies that are caught in the crossfire. He also spins the slot machine at the bottom, in which when 3 of a kind line up, awakens Travis's inner edgelord and he enters dark side mode, which gives him invincibility and a combat boost for a short time depending on which kind of lineup you get. For defensive options, Travis has 2 main ones. Blocking, which he does automatically whenever he's locked onto a target, and an emergency evade to dodge out of harm's way. These are all the combat options that are available to Travis on the surface, but there's actually 3 more that are hidden from the player. The first is the triangle death blow. After using a death blow and inputting the same input again during the short period that the game slows down, you'll increase both the damage of the death blow as well as its range. You can tell you did it right by triangles appearing across the enemy. The second hidden ability is the parry. By lowering your guard and bringing it back up right before Travis gets hit, you can parry the attack and knock groups of enemies away, and even follow up with a devastating riposte, making this an amazing crowd control tool. Lastly, and perhaps the most important, is the dark step. By moving either left or right the moment Travis blocks an attack, he can sideslip the enemy he's targeting and time will slow down, giving him free reign for a deadly combo. Dark Step is easily Travis's strongest tool both defensively and offensively. It often trivializes the game with how powerful it is, and honestly I can't imagine fighting some of the bosses in this game without it. It's a vital tool that, in my opinion, is stuck in a bit of an awkward place between being way too strong, but also feeling borderline necessary at times to effectively get past certain bosses or enemies. I had no idea about any of these 3 options until the end of the game, and I wish I had figured them out sooner. And I'm glad I ended up doing a second playthrough of this game knowing these options existed, because despite them being perhaps a little too strong for their own good, they do elevate the combat quite a bit, which, to be completely honest, is just a little too simple.
Quit your bitching and get with the program.
While it may seem like there's plenty of options available on the surface, there really isn't too much thought or consideration that goes into the decisions you make in battle. Spamming the correct stance of attack against guarding enemies, triangle death blows, and dark stepping is all you really need to breeze through the game and its 10 bosses. The enemy design in general is actually one of the weakest parts of the game. Basic enemies leave much to be desired and usually fall into one of 4 categories: bare fists, melee weapon, range weapon, and beam katana. Your strategy doesn't change much between any of these enemy types though, except for maybe the beam katana enemies, in which you have to play a little bit more defensively against them because they're much more aggressive. But it's still nothing that a simple dark step or a parry can't easily deal with. Bosses are better, but often still have a very similar design between them that makes the fights feel more repetitive than interesting. Every fight is usually the same, in which they have a flurry of attacks that can be easily dark stepped for damage, and a few unblockables that often leave a small window for damage right after. Several of the bosses do often have a gimmick ability that does vary up the fight, such as summoning clones of themselves or turning the screen upside down, and while these definitely add more identity to each of these fights, when it comes down to it, the actual combat with them often feels exactly the same. Travis also gets beam katana upgrades throughout the game, which offer different high and low stance combo strings, different death blows with varying hitboxes, and different attack speeds and different parry attacks. These seem nice at first, but it doesn't really mean much in the end because, generally speaking, each new beam katana upgrade is objectively better than the one before it. This felt like a missed opportunity for me in allowing different weapons to fit different playstyles, but with each weapon being an objective upgrade both in power and moveset from the weapon before it, there really isn't any reason to use any of the older weapons. The main problem with the combat isn't even the options available to Travis, it's the enemy and boss design that never allows all of Travis's abilities to fully flourish. With only 1 or 2 moves being completely dominant in his toolkit, and the high and low stance attacks never being challenged beyond if they guard high then attack low, and vice versa, it feels like the repetitiveness of the combat doesn't lie in the lack of options, but rather only a couple of moves dominate the game, while other options are severely underutilized. It's the enemy design that holds the combat back in this regard, rather than Travis's toolkit.
Yeah, I can't stand these people with all their nonsense complaints. They think they can just say anything. It's crazy.
With that being said, the combat is just interesting enough to keep you engaged, and it does feel good to just kill stuff, which I think is a very underappreciated part of game design these days. What the combat may struggle with in terms of balance and enemy variety, it compensates with a blood-fueled power fantasy of clearing out huge groups of enemies in a satisfying manner. The game is also constantly throwing these super wacky scenarios your way that will often leave you wondering what's going to happen next. You may be fighting in a subway one moment, and then suddenly you're playing a mecha space shoot 'em up the next. It's completely crazy, and the way of throwing logic and tradition out the window is what makes No More Heroes ooze personality. The combat is just one part of the gameplay though. There is also all the mini-games and the open world of Santa Destroy. During the first part of the 3-part cycle I mentioned, you'll be navigating an open world, finding ways to earn money for either the entry fee to proceed through the story or for upgrades for Travis. This comes in the form of 2 ways to earn money. The first are side jobs, which pay very little but are worth it alone just for the hilarious novelty of doing things like mowing lawns and picking up trash. These side jobs are very simple mini games that have Travis doing the most absurd things such as punching trees to collect coconuts or performing suicidal bike jumps. My favorite of these is filling cars with gas. I guess that gas pump has Bluetooth. The game also makes extensive use of motion controls both in combat and in minigames. It's a fun novelty that definitely adds to the experience, even if the controls are sometimes unresponsive. Getting gold ranks on these missions unlock both assassination gigs and free fight missions, which are just combat challenges that offer more money and where the bulk of your cash is going to come from. The free fight missions require you to beat a group of enemies without getting hit once. These seem pretty difficult at first, but a few well-placed dark steps and parries makes pretty quick work of these. As far as I'm aware, rankings mean absolutely nothing in these combat challenges, and thank God that they don't. This game desperately needs a retry button, and the lack of one is one of the main reasons why I grew to hate the open world so much. The world map is relatively small, and using Travis's bike, the Spieltiger, I'm probably mispronouncing that like crazy, his bike, you can get anywhere you need to go in about a minute tops. The problem is how often you need to go between the same places again and again and again, and again, and again. We'll take Assassination Gig 19 for example. This requires you to kill as many gun-wielding enemies as you can before you get hit once, and requires at least 7 kills for a gold medal. Let's say you get hit and you don't get the gold. Bummer. Instead of just hitting a retry button, you must go all the way back to K Entertainment, the building where you can accept these missions, wait for the game to load, accept the mission, leave, let it load again, drive all the way back to the mission, wait for it to load again, wait for the intro to play out, and then you can try again. Oh, what's that? I just got hit again? Well, I guess it's time to do that all over again. This is absolutely ridiculous, and this game desperately needed just a simple retry button. Another annoyance is the gem, where Travis can travel between ranked fights to increase both his health and strength. A new level of each stat is added after playing the minigame here, but the amount of times you'll end up coming here and playing it again and again and again is way past excessive. It grows tiresome very, very quickly, and it's the constant back and forth between the same handful of places over and over and over and over again that makes the open world such a chore to navigate. Travis does have an Akira bike slide though, so I guess that fixes everything. The good news is that there is no reward for completing all the side missions as well as getting gold medals, meaning absolutely nothing outside of bragging rights. This is actually a blessing in disguise and means that you can focus solely on the easy and quick missions to rack up cash very, very fast. Between that and getting good rankings on the ranked fights, which reward you with more money at the end, you can reduce the actual money grinding section of this game to about 10 minutes or less at a time. You may be a completionist like myself, but learn to let that go because there is no reward for doing all these missions. Trying to complete every side mission as well as getting the gold medals will absolutely kill the pacing of the game. I did that on my first playthrough and was completely fed up by the halfway point, whereas the second playthrough I focused solely on efficiency rather than completeness and enjoyed it much, much more. The grinding does pick up a bit by the end of the game, in which you have 2 big purchases to make, that being both the entry fee as well as the last beam katana upgrade, which is almost as much as the entry fee. Getting the last weapon upgrade is absolutely essential because 1, it's just a really good weapon, and 2, the true ending and final boss is locked behind you acquiring it. I got to this part of the game with almost no cash on hand and had to spend between 30 minutes to an hour grinding cash to afford everything. Not the worst experience in the world, but definitely a boring one. Overall, the gameplay of No More Heroes is more focused on novelty than it is polished or finely tuned traditional systems, and this is actually one of its greatest strengths. Even 15 years after No More Heroes' release, it seems like games have become trend followers more than ever before, and with the huge amount of remake culture going on, No More Heroes was a surprising breath of fresh air, even with all of its unpolished systems. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement, that's for sure, but the core systems were still engaging. It's almost like the game is self-aware that it's having you do something so ridiculous and stupid, and it laughs at you while you do it. And when it does, I can't help but laugh along with it. I could do without all the gym minigames though. Those got a little bit too much. Now when it comes to the story of No More Heroes, I need to preface by saying I have not played No More Heroes 2, 3, or Travis Strikes Again. My thoughts and interpretations of the story are going to be solely based on the first game alone and how I experienced it, so take that as you will. The story follows Travis Touchdown, who became an assassin because he needed some quick cash. He also met Sylvia Crystal at a bar, a girl who's apparently never heard of a button-up shirt before, who works for the United Assassins Association and acts as Travis's agent, who sets up ranked fights for Travis so he can reach the top #1 spot. This requires him to fight against many different assassins with different ideologies and motives. Because I don't want this video to go on any longer than it already is, I won't go into detail, but I will say that all the different assassins have a different impression of Travis. Some are more psychotic and some are more sympathetic, and it's fun to dissect these characters to get more of an idea of what drives them compared to our protagonist. It makes them feel much more alive rather than just, I'm bad and I'm going to kill you. The game begins with Travis on his way to fight the 10th rank assassin Death Metal, with one of the best character introductions I've seen in a long time.
Fuckhead!
Oh my god, he's literally me. Travis is an anime-obsessed weeb who lives in the Santa Destroy Motel. One quick look around his room will tell you everything you need to know about his personality.
Moe.
message for Mr. Travis Touchdown. Just calling to remind you that you haven't returned one of our rentals. Let's see here. It's, titled Big German Jugs Collection Number 23.
He sees himself as this exceptionally cool guy, when in reality, most people hate him or think he's just plain weird.
You really are an idiot, aren't you, Travis? Come back to reality. I mean, look at yourself. You are a dopey otaku assassin. The bottom of the barrel. No woman would be caught dead with you unless she was a desperate bitch.
He's basically a parody character of how anime-obsessed nerds see themselves, and his extreme combat prowess and skill is juxtaposed by his outward goofiness and awkwardness, making him a really enjoyable and funny character, and easily the best part of the game.
You are the third-ranked assassin? Bitch!
Despite his vulgarity, Travis does have morals, such as not killing women. Well, maybe except for that one. And that one. Ooh, maybe that one too. Okay, maybe only one thing matters to Travis. The path to ultimate strength and fighting your own kind. Reaching the top, and not by title or money, but through pure skill alone. Travis aims to be number one to prove that he is the best. And why does that matter to him? Because he's promised to get one night of love with Sylvia. Oh yeah!
Sex! Sex! 俺はセックスをするんじゃねえ！俺自身が真のセックスになるんだ！ Sex!
The writing in No More Heroes is crude and vulgar, and it's something that they could never get away with today. Maybe the humor in this game is just a good fit for me, or maybe it's just refreshing to hear dialogue that isn't scared to offend people, or what we would call today the modern audience. The humor hits the perfect blend of extreme silliness with surprisingly serious subject matter like sexual abuse and suicide. As Travis kills his way to the top, you start to notice hints of genuine care in his character that amongst all his goofiness and downright psychotic killing tendencies, he is capable of sympathy for his peers, but his own childlike nature becomes one of his biggest roadblocks for making strong relationships. The story never takes itself too seriously though, and the last stretch of the game spirals out of control with some of the most silly plot twists that had me grinning from ear to ear. After killing Death Metal and paying an ever-increasing entry fee for the fights, Travis faces off against a karaoke-loving corrupt policeman, a high school samurai, a postman superhero, a Scandinavian model, a magician, and many, many more, with most of them being a reference to pop culture, either in their appearance or their personality. These references that Suda makes feel very personal to him, and it makes the entire game feel very authentic, and this is what makes the writing such a unique experience. After Travis reaches his rank 5 fight against Let's Shake, a punk rock singer with a giant nuclear robot, his fight is interrupted by Henry, a man who uses a beam sword very similar to his. He's also Irish, so that's how you know he's bad.
Your instincts serve you well. I
don't know who you are or what you want, Sir Henry. Where are your manners? That was my kill, you naughty boy!
Travis tries to fight him, but is stopped by Sylvia, who says it's against the rules, and whatever the circumstances, Travis is now rank 5. Although he's not too happy about it.
That's fucked up! That's the stupidest rule I've ever heard! This guy's mine, and you just want me to let him go, bitch?
After reaching rank 2, the story takes a quick spiral when Travis decides to call the UAA hotline and is surprised to hear Sylvia's mom on the other end. Turns out Sylvia is a con artist, and the entire United Assassins Association does not exist. The fights were honest and true, but there is no such thing as rankings or an association or any of that. Sylvia just used Travis's entry fee before every mission to bribe assassins that she could find to fight Travis, all while pocketing some of the money for herself, fooling Travis into thinking that this was all some kind of organized event.
You set me up, bitch.
Sylvia goes completely AWOL, and this leaves Travis on his own as he goes off to face against what he thought was going to be the #1 ranked assassin, who is clearly a Darth Vader ripoff. Before the fight starts, he gets killed by, who? Who is this? After a funny exchange, we learn that her name is Jean, coincidentally the same name as his cat, and she's Travis's half-sister. In a cliche trope done in a No More Hero style way, it's revealed that she killed Travis's parents, and that was the real reason why Sylvia set up all these fights for him. It was all to train Travis and make him stronger, so he could get his vengeance against Jean. After a somewhat challenging fight, Jean is then put into eternal slumber, and Travis returns to his home to sit upon his mighty throne, basking his accomplishments of becoming the world's best assassin, and we're rewarded with a very unsatisfying ending.
Nah, these fights don't work like that. It's time to die, Mr. First Rank.
You gotta be shitting me.
That is, unless you got every beam katana up until this point and you unlock the true ending.
Will you hurry up with that? I'll be outside.
That was close. Thanks.
Ugh, what an idiot. You're a disgrace to yourself and all those you've killed.
Henry returns and is the true final boss of the game, and he's one of the better fights, thankfully. There's no real gimmicks, it's just a fight that utilizes everything you've learned at this point and puts it to the test. Unfortunately though, he is very weak to dark stepping, like most of the bosses are in this game, which does make the fight feel a little disappointing in the challenge department. He does have a cool super attack though.
It's time for you to sleep.
After the fight ends, we learn in a twist of fate that Sylvia is actually Henry's wife, and Henry is also Travis's brother. I thought Travis was screwed up.
What the hell? That's the craziest shit I've ever heard. Why would you bring up something like that at the very last minute of the game?
After a cheesy freeze frame, we see Sylvia with a child named Jean, and a tease that there will never be a sequel. Of course, we know that that isn't true, but for the purpose of this video, the story is now over. It's simple, crude, inappropriate, and I absolutely loved every single minute of it. It never takes itself too seriously, and in an era of movie games where it feels like everyone's trying to be the next Alfred Hitchcock, No More Heroes is unapologetically itself, and I cannot love it anymore for that. I also feel like I need to briefly speak on the sound design. The soundtrack is a huge high point of this game, and it has a large variety of selections that include rock, techno, and alternative that greatly match its nonconformist tone. Each assassin has their own theme, whose sound reflects their personality. Travis himself also has his own motif that recurs in several different pieces throughout the game if you listen carefully, so that's always a nice little treat. The tunes are catchy and appropriate, and I can confidently say that it is one of the stronger soundtracks I've heard in several years. The voice cast also did a phenomenal job as well, especially the voice of Travis, whose screams breathe life into me.
What the?
However, the sound mix is a little rough around the edges. I'm not sure if it's the Switch port specifically or just how the game in general is mixed, but the volume between gameplay and cutscenes is not consistent. I found cutscenes to be significantly quieter than the rest of the game, and I had to constantly be adjusting my volume. Secondly, some of the audio samples in the game are really rough, and you can frequently hear crackling in them. Voice lines of enemies also seem a little unpolished, with enemies frequently playing two lines of dialogue over each other. This can be a little bit jarring when an enemy spawns in and you hear two voice lines and assume that at least two enemies spawn, when in actuality it was just one enemy that played two voice lines over each other. The entire audio quality in general also takes a nosedive when many voice lines are played at once, like if you kill multiple enemies at the same time. No More Heroes is an ambitious title that tries to set itself apart by trying many different ideas and styles. For better or for worse, there isn't anything quite like it. While the core gameplay may be a little rough around the edges and the lack of enemy variety and boss design leaves much to be desired, the experience is brought up by the authentic writing, the presentation, the unique ideas, and the incredible soundtrack. If I had to describe No More Heroes in a single phrase, it would be brimming with soul.
Oh shit! All news to me.
I'm gonna need shock treatment to get over this one.
You can feel the passion poured into making it a fun and unique experience, even if at times it feels like the game is holding you hostage with its silly minigames and frustrating open world. While objectively having its problems for sure, it's incredibly refreshing to play something so filled with artistic integrity. No More Heroes may not be the best game at every moment, but there wasn't a second I spent with this game that I regret.